Look around at our churches, our homes, our culture, and tell me honestly, where is the male leadership? Not dominance, not ego, but true leadership. We have more content than ever, more programs than ever, more conferences than ever, and yet fewer men can lead a household and under firm pressure take responsibility without asking permission. This didn't happen accidentally, and it won't be fixed by being nicer. But many men feel that what they can't articulate, the lion has been declawed, caged, and told to apologize for his strength. The question isn't whether men were meant to lead. The question is what kind of leadership God actually commands. Let's find out. Welcome back, all you wandering souls, to the Wandering Soul podcast. My name is Vince, and I believe it's our ninth episode. Before we begin, I'd like for you to help me spread this ministry globally as much as possible. And by liking this video and subscribing to this channel, I'd really appreciate it. And I believe your creator will too. I'd like to tell a couple of stories before we get into things. And I think it would help set the basis for understanding of the subject at a more personal level. And before we begin to dissect what's really going on, I think there comes a time in every man's life that he finally realizes that he needs to step up and lead. And it happened to me when I was about 27. I became president of the HOA at this townhouse complex in Huntington Beach, California, where I had just bought a brand new home. And I was reluctant at first, and since I didn't really know if they would give me a chance or that I could do everything I needed to do. Most of the owners were in their 40s and 50s, and I was pretty young, so I didn't know if they'd actually listen to me. But you know, when I when I bought into this place, the homeowners association was a mess, and it had lawsuits and high insurance rates, and everything kind of needed to be fixed up. And it took me about 2 years, but people listened, and I got the job done. Reluctant or not, it worked, and I moved on. That was my reluctant leader story, I guess. And I think there's this influential leader story that I needed to tell too. I didn't really know it was influential until maybe 8 or 9 years later. I used to coach my son's sixth and seventh grade basketball team, and I was the only coach that would ever wear a suit and tie to all of their games. And they thought that was pretty cool, and they seemed to play much harder than the rest of the league. But little did I know until my son told me, he was about 21 at the time, how he thought we really respected 12 and 13-year-olds. He thought that I really respected 12 and 13-year-olds by wearing a suit and tie to a basketball game. He felt like they were in college or in the pros, and it really hit him pretty pretty deep. And he even asked if he could have the tie that I wore, which I did have, and I did give to him. And I think you never really know when you're having influence as a leader on your sons or your daughters, especially young men. They're really looking for it. Okay, back to our topic. Um, I guess let's start at the beginning, not with culture, but with scripture. In Genesis 1, verse 26 to 28, God said, "Let us make man in our image. Let them have dominion." And that's dominion over all the earth and every living creature. Dominion is not abuse. Dominion is responsibility for outcomes. Before sin entered the world, God entrusted Adam, guarding the garden, naming creation, bearing moral responsibility. When things went wrong, God didn't call Eve first, even though she's the one that did get him in trouble. He called Adam. Why? Because leadership is accountability before it is authority. A passive man is not a harmless man. He's an abdicated man. And abdication always creates a vacuum where someone else will fill. History rightly observes that cultures collapse not from external threat, but from internal weakness when guardians stop guarding. Modern Christianity often rewards men for being agreeable, not anchored, emotional, not dangerous in the right way. Scripture says something very different. In 1 Corinthians 16:13, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, and act like men. Be strong. That verse doesn't mean be loud. It means be unmovable when it counts. Many men were taught that leadership means waiting for approval or avoiding conflict, never making anyone uncomfortable. But a man who cannot withstand discomfort cannot protect anyone. Modern society exposes the counterfeit options men are given. The soft, domesticated version with no spine, or the narcissistic, godless strongman who worships himself. Both paths break men. Now let's talk about Jesus, the real one. Jesus was not weak. He was submitted. He flipped tables, he confronted kings, he walked into mobs without fear. And when arrested, his words alone knocked soldiers to the ground. Yet he also washed feet. Why? Because biblical masculinity is power under control. In Matthew 26:53, Jesus says, do you think I cannot call on my Father and he will once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? He didn't lack power. He chose restraint in obedience to mission. That is leadership. Controlled power is more terrifying than rage and more trustworthy than passivity. Your scripture gives us practical clarity. In Ephesians 5, verse 23 and 25, God says, for the husband is the head of the wife. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Leadership is not entitlement. It is sacrificial direction. A man leads by setting moral temperature, taking responsibility when things fail, moving first toward truth, not comfort. In Joshua 24:15, he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, notice Joshua doesn't call a family meeting. He declares a direction. That kind of leadership feels disruptive in a culture that's addicted to consensus, but it builds security. Fix all this? Not by shaming men, which they get a lot of, from the very start, in schools, in colleges, and even into modern day workforce. I mean, it's shamed by women especially. So you don't fix this by shaming men or flattering them, and not by replacing weakness with ego. We restore direct alignment with the Father. I think I've said this many times before. They need to be in alignment. But just as Jesus received identity before performance, this is my beloved Son, men must stop outsourcing their authority to programs, applause, or romantic approval. They need to hold their frame. A man who knows who he answers to does not need permission from the crowd. A man with direct access to God becomes ungovernable by a corrupt system. In closing, if you're a man listening to this, stop apologizing for your strength. Submit it to God. Stand up. Lead your home. Guard with what's being entrusted to you. And if you're a girlfriend, a wife, or a mother, don't manage his spine. Pray for him to grow. The world doesn't need nicer men. It needs anchored men. The Lion of Judah was never meant to be a therapy animal. Men, it's time to find your inner lion. It's time to hold your strength. Be the leader that God created you to be. I thank you for sharing this time with me today, and hope to see you next time.